This step, I want to try and make sure though. I felt last week we were a little gray with our study on Jacob last week, and so I prayed about it and looked into it a little bit more this week, and we'll continue to look at the life of Jacob tonight. But hopefully too, if we can, we'll set up the transition from this step into the next step. So we'll see if we're able to do that. There's only going to be one more class this year because next week at 5 o'clock they're having the Christmas fellowship party dinner. So we won't have a class next week because they're doing that at 5 o'clock, and then we will have class the week after that though because there is a Sunday night service. It's a play, but that's at 6. So we can start class at 5. I guess that's the 16th. I think, yeah, the 16th. But then the 23rd is no night service, and then I don't know what we're doing the 30th yet. So we'll see. So we will meet tonight and the 16th, but we won't meet the 9th and the 23rd. So, but if there's Sunday night service, we intend to meet if we can. But anyway, let's look now at Jacob's, continue to look at Jacob and see how, God does. The point of this, the Hebrew Fathers, is that God takes a man of faith, remember? He believed in God and counted unto him as righteousness. And he takes this man of faith and he makes these covenant promises with him to bless the entire world. And he starts this line that, remember the man of faith, Abraham tries to take matter in his own hands, and we end up with Ishmael, the child of the bondservant. But then we finally get the child of the promise, which is Isaac. Isaac has Jacob and Esau. We've been looking at that. It's a bit confusing because we know Jacob is he's aptly named. He's a deceitful, heel snatching, deceiving little guy, and his mom is too. And we talked about, how does he get away with that? How does God bless that? And so we looked at that last week. But the most important part of this is to realize that God is making this set aside holy nation that he's going to use to bless the entire world, including us. And so tonight I hope us to see the transition from these men into a nation, and the nation that we still know today. And we all know that nation's Israel. And so let's look at Genesis 32.
Wait, one thing I was going to say that I thought of last class when we were talking about, that Jacob deceived his father with his mom's help. God said up front that, the older shall serve the younger, so he knew up front his will would be that would be. You know what I'm saying? We were talking about how he lied.
Yeah, well, there's no doubt about that. God's omniscient, and he's infinite. He knows the beginning from the end already. And so you're right. He knew the younger would serve the older. He knew Jacob was a heel snatcher. They were fighting in her womb, and he was born with his hand on the heel. So none of this catches God by surprise. But why does God bless this deceiver?
We're broken people, and we work.
So I think you're getting to it, Joe. So let's read now Genesis 32, and then we'll see how far we get. Looking at the rest of Jacob, being transitioned not just into the man Jacob, but to the nation Israel. So chapter 32 starts out verse 1. And Jacob went on his way, and the angels of God met him. And when Jacob saw them, he said, "This is God's host," and he called the name of that place Mahanaim. And God sent messengers before him to Esau, his brother, into the land of Seir, the country of Edom, which would be modern day Jordan area. And he commanded them, saying, "Thus shall you speak unto my lord Esau, thy servant Jacob saith thus, I have sojourned with Laban, and stayed there until now." Now, don't discount the fact here too that his mom says to him, if we go back, "Hey, your brother wants to kill you, and I'm going to send you to my brother Laban to get a wife for a few days." And it's been about 21 years. This is not just a few days. It's been, he served what he thought was for Rachel for 7 years. He gets Leah. He has to fulfill her week for another 7 years to get Rachel, and then he fulfills her week, which was 7 more years. So he's at 21 years instead of a few days. So a lot of times went by, is my point here. And so the last time Esau and Jacob were together, what would Esau want to do? He's going to kill him. He wanted to lay his hands on him, wouldn't he? And so Jacob hadn't forgot that, but mind you, a couple decades have went by. All right, so he says in verse 5, he says, I have oxen and asses, flocks and men servants and women servants, and I have sent to tell my Lord that I may find grace in thy sight. And the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, we came to thy brother Esau, and he also cometh to meet thee, and 400 men with him. Jacob's like, ruh-roh, you can imagine. Then Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed, and he divided the people that was with him, and the flocks and herds and the camels into 2 bands, and said, if Esau come to the one company and smite it, then the other company which is left shall escape. So Jacob gets strategic here, thinking his brother Esau is going to wipe him out. And so he's like, I'll set it up where you can get one, but can't get the other. He won't be able to take everything. And so verse 9 says, and Jacob said, O God, my father Abraham, and God of my father Isaac, the Lord which saidst unto me, return unto thy country and to thy kindred, and I will deal well with thee. I am not worthy of the least of all thy mercies, and of all the truth which thou hast showed unto thy servant. For with my staff I passed over this Jordan, and now I have become 2 bands. Deliver me, I pray thee, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, lest he will come and smite me and the mother with the children. And thou sayest, I will surely do thee good, and make thy seed as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude. And he lodged there that same night, and took of that which came to his hand a present for Esau, his brother. So he's basically now preparing a gift to send forward to Esau. And it says the gift is 200 she-goats and 20 he-goats, 200 ewes and 20 rams, 30 milch camels with their coats, 40 kine, 10 bulls, 20 she-asses, and 10 foals. And he delivered them into the hand of his servants. Every drove by themselves, and said unto his servants, pass over before me and put a space betwixt drove and drove. So he's sending them in companies with a space, in companies with a space. And so it says, and he commanded the foremost, the first company, saying, when Esau my brother meeteth thee, and asketh thee, saying, who art thou, and whither goest thou, and whose are these before thee? Then thou shalt say, they be thy servant Jacob's. It is a present sent unto my lord Esau, and behold, also he is behind us. So in other words, when he asks who you are, you tell him that the gifts are from me, and I'm back here. Make sure he knows that I'm in the rear. And so commanded he the second and the third, and all that followed the drove, saying, on this manner shall you speak unto Esau when you find him. So he was really trying to overwhelm him with gifts, sending one group, and they would say the same thing as the next group. It's just like boom, boom, boom. And say, moreover, behold, thy servant Jacob is behind us, for he said, I will appease him with the present that goeth before me, and after I will see his face. Peradventure, just maybe, he will accept of me. So went the present over before him, and himself lodged that night in the company. And he rose up that night, and took his 2 wives, and his 2 women servants, and his 11 sons, and passed over the ford Jabbok. Now, something we didn't look at too much last week was Jacob having those 11 sons. Those are pretty important dudes, as it would turn out. And he had, it was pretty interesting if you have time to go read it, the battle they have having kids. Because Leah, can have children, and then her servant can have children. But Rachel can't have children. She's barren, but her servant can have children. So Rachel has kids, and it makes Leah has kids, makes Rachel jealous. And Rachel gives her servant, kind of like Abraham's wife did him, and says, well, you can have kids by my servant. And they even name the kids kind of like in-your-face names, And it's this total battle between these 2 wives over who's going to please Jacob. But finally, after 10 sons, his true love, Rachel, has 1 son at the very end. He's the 11th son. Anybody know his name? Joseph, that's right. So she has Joseph. So now we have these 11 sons, and we know there's 1 more coming, right? But he hadn't been born yet. And these 11 sons are born in this journey where he's supposed to be going back, but he stops on the way to meet his brother Esau. And so it says in verse 23, he took them, all of his family, all these things, and sent them over the brook, and sent over that he had. And Jacob was left alone. And so stop right there. Don't miss the fact that Jacob sent everything he had over into this drove and stayed back by himself completely. So Jacob sends out all these gifts. He sends out all these companies, and then he sends out all his wives and all of his children, and he stays back on the other side. And when he's all alone, all by himself, this is the scenario of what's going to happen next. This famous night that we've read about, we've heard about. So it said, and Jacob was left alone, and there wrestled a man with him until the breaking of day. So how long did they wrestle? All night long. So he wrestles with this man. You know, he stays back all by himself, and he's going to get him a little bit of rest, and he ends up wrestling all night with this man until the breaking of day. And when he saw that he prevailed not against him, he touched, and that would be the one he was wrestling with. And it's not Jacob. This is the one that wrestled with Jacob. When he sees that he prevailed not against Jacob, against him, he touched the hollow of his thigh. And the hollow of Jacob's thigh was out of joint as he wrestled with him. So this man wrestling with Jacob, was wrestling with him all night long, and he hadn't prevailed against Jacob. And so because he's not prevailed against him, he touches him in the hollow of his thigh, and his thigh comes out of joint as he's wrestling with him. And he says, let me go, for the day breaketh. And he said, I will not let thee go, except thou bless me. And he says unto him, what is thy name? And he says, Jacob. So Jacob, says, I'm not letting you go until you bless me. Why would he do that? Why would he do that? This guy's wrestling him, and it's a pretty good battle. Neither one seems to be letting one go, and one finally knocked, the one guy knocks the other guy's hip out of joint. And he says, let me go. And he says, I ain't letting you go till you bless me. And so he says unto him, what is your name? And that's the man that's wrestling him. And Jacob goes, well, my name is Jacob. And he said, thy name shall be called no more Jacob, but Israel. For as a prince hast thou power with God and with men, and hast prevailed. And Jacob asked and said, tell me, I pray thee, thy name. And he said, wherefore is it that thou dost ask after my name? And he blessed him there. Now this man, who Jacob wouldn't let go until he blessed him, that knocked Jacob's hip out of joint, why would he say, why are you asking me what my name is? Why would he even ask Jacob that? You ever think about that? You reckon the guy Jacob knew who his name was? Jacob knew who he was wrestling against. There wasn't no doubt in his mind who it was. And that's why the man says, why are you asking me what my name is? And here's the proof if you just keep reading. And and Jacob, after, this man wrestled with, blesses him. And Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, for I have seen God face to face, and my life is preserved. Peniel meaning the face of God. So Jacob knew who he had been wrestling with, because he named the place the face of God, and then he says, for I have seen the face of God and lived. So who would this be? And then we know no man has ever seen God completely and lived, right? But people have seen God in one way, Jesus. So this is a pre-Bethlehem appearance, a Christophany, where Jesus, appears. We saw him appear to Abraham, and now we see him also appearing here to Jacob. And so Jesus, in the flesh, appears in the night and wrestles with Jacob all night long. Now, let's look back at the wrestling match a little bit, because this is can be confusing. So, y'all have any questions on it when you were reading it, when I was reading it? Did any of it catch you? Because if y'all got questions, that's even better than me bringing them up. All right, so it says in verse 24, and Jacob was left alone and wrestled a man with him until the breaking of the day. And when he saw that he prevailed not against him, now this is Jesus he's wrestling with. And it's saying, and when Jesus saw that he prevailed not against Jacob, he touched the hollow of his thigh, and the hollow of Jacob's thigh was out of joint, and he wrestled with him. That's a little confusing to me, at least on first read. Couldn't Jesus just whoop him?
Why is he wrestling?
Couldn't he just whoop us too? Give us free will?
Yeah, I don't know why he's wrestling.
It's not normal.
Well, maybe he's testing Jacob. Abraham got tested, right? When he was asked to give up Isaac. So maybe now, we talked about last week, Jacob was the deceiver, and he was deceitful. And how did God bless all that stuff? And was he looking for material blessings? And was he looking for, power and those kinds of things? Sure, he probably was. But we did see just a glimmer of faith there too, didn't we? I believe we did. We saw a glimmer of faith. It at least meant something to Jacob. Esau despised it. Esau didn't even care. He finally wept when he lost the blessing after he gave up the birthright. So we do see just a glimmer of faith there. And so I think what could be happening right here, and then y'all can interject your opinion, is the Lord was going to see how easy Jacob was going to give up. Can I, just kind of push this guy away? I know that I'm weak. When I got something that's really weighing me down, I don't wrestle with God about it all night. I might wrestle for 10 minutes and then be like, I got to go do something else. But Jacob persevered in this battle. He wouldn't quit. And we see that because we read the next verse too. And so after he prevails not against him, he touched the hollow of his thigh, and the hollow of his thigh was out of joint, and he wrestled with him more, basically, what it means there. And then he says, let me go, for the day breaketh. That's the Lord. Just let me go. It's morning. And he says, I will not let thee go, except thou bless me. He knew who he was wrestling with. And he said, I'm not letting you go until you bless me. Jacob wasn't perfect. Jacob had a lot of flaws. But Jacob knew this was God. And he wouldn't let him go till God blessed him. And that's something we can learn from too. When we're struggling, when we're fighting, we need to have a moment where we say to the Lord, I'm not letting go till you bless me. And it's not necessarily that God's lining up with our will, but that we, stay in that position with God until our will lines up with his. Or till God opens our eyes up to that. You know what I'm saying? So this was a turning point for him. This was a turning point for Jacob. He didn't let go. He didn't run off. It was not like he was an easy opponent. He persevered. And so they go through the whole deal with what's your name? And did God know his name?
Yeah, but I think it's important. What did he say his name was the last time he asked for a blessing? Who did he say his name was?
Are you
Esau.
talking about?
Esau. He lied to deceive his father to get the blessing.
He did do that. That's right.
And so the Lord's like, okay, tell me who Jacob is just forthright this time. He's like, last time I did it by stealing and cheating, but this time he knew who he was talking to face, and knew the Lord already knew the answer. So he was just straightforward, I feel like.
So this is among the confession for him.
Yeah, it's like he's completely turned over the new leaf.
That's right. So this is among the confession too, because the confession is when you agree with God. You tell God who you really are, but he already knows who you are. So when he asked him what his name was, did he know what his name was?
Yeah.
He does. Just like when he convicts us of being a sinner, does he already know we're a sinner? But it takes that moment in time where we say, oh yeah, God, you're right, I am a sinner. And so...
But he could have said, the way he did Esau, he could have, right here, had he not known it truly was God and had that kind of his heart right, he could have said any name under the sun to try to get out of the situation,
That's right.
He was forthcoming. And
I think you're dead on. I think that's exactly right. And so he has this moment where his eyes are open to who God is, and he's honest with God. And God gives him an opportunity to be honest too, with asking him a question that God already knew the answer. Remember what he asked Adam and Eve after they sinned? Where art thou? And we said that's kind of like a parent and their little kid playing hide and go seek. We know where they're at, even though they think they're hiding from us. God knew where they were at too, right? And so God knew his name was Jacob. But he answers honestly, and he says, Jacob. And then he says, thy name shall no more be called Jacob, supplanter, ill snatcher, deceiver, but Israel. For as a prince hast thou power with God and with men, and hast prevailed. So he's now transformed him. There's a process here of transformation. Remember the Old Testament, they had the same saving faith that we got. Abraham believed God, and it was counted unto him as righteousness. Everybody that got saved in the Old Testament got saved because they believed God. But they weren't spiritually born again at the moment that they believed the same way we are. Because we are children of the New Testament, and the work's been finished. Jesus has died on the cross. He's rose from the dead, and we get saved, and we receive the Holy Spirit, and we're born again. But at that time, they weren't indwelled by the Holy Spirit as soon as they believed. And so there was a process, and the Holy Spirit came and did special works, but they weren't indwelled by the Holy Spirit like we are. So you got to remember that when you study the Old Testament. But there is this transformation process we see here, and God is signifying this transformation process. Israel, I got it wrote down. It basically, though, it means governed by God. So he goes from being a hill snatcher to being governed by God. He goes from being a deceiver, a sinner, basically, to being governed by God. That's kind of a picture of us being born again. So we go from being a lost sinner to being governed by God because he now indwells us. Does that mean that the work's completed with Jacob? He's Israel now and everything's going to be perfect? It does not. But this does mean there's been a turning point now in Jacob's life. And, another thing, we if we fly through this too fast, we miss that in chapter 32 in the beginning. What does he do as he realizes that Esau's men are coming? He does pray, doesn't he? He does pray to the Lord. And so let's contrast Jacob and Esau for a minute. Jacob has a lot of issues and a lot of problems, but he also shows faith. He does pray. He does acknowledge God. He does show the want and the desire for a birthright and a blessing. Does Esau ever show any of those characteristics? Not even once. Not even once. You don't see Esau's faith mentioned one time. Esau's mentioned in the Hall of Faith of Hebrews 11, but not for his faith. He's daddy's faith in giving the blessings that he gave to Jacob and Esau are what's mentioned. Esau's faith's not mentioned because obviously Esau didn't have it. And so we even talked about that in Sunday school this morning, that one key verse, that said it was by believing in God that they would be established. And so that's the difference, man. When you read Ephesians 2, 8 and 9, for by grace are you saved through faith. It's not of yourselves, it is the gift of God, not of works, lest any man should boast. So we're all sinners, but we all get saved by faith through grace. And so, or by grace through faith. So we see this now in this moment where Jacob's transformed to Israel in God's eyes. And he says in verse 31, then, and as he passed over Peniel, the sun rose upon him, and he halted upon his thigh. Therefore the children of Israel eat not of the sinew which shrank, which is upon the hollow of the thigh unto this day, because he touched the hollow of Jacob's thigh and the sinew that shrank. And so the Jews would never eat of the hip of an animal because of what happened to their father, Jacob, or Israel. But, there's also a picture there too. He's now dependent on a staff, right? He can't walk like a normal man. So, God's given him this thorn in the flesh, so to speak. Well, really wasn't so to speak, a real one. And he's now dependent. And there's a type and a picture there. As Christians, we're dependent too, right? We're dependent on the Lord. We have to lean on him. And so Jacob has to lean on the staff as the Lord has broken him in this battle. But he was broken, but he didn't let go. So anyway, y'all got any comments or questions there? All right, so let's keep going and read a little bit about Jacob and Esau finally get together in their reunion. And Jacob lifted up his eyes and looked, and behold, Esau came, and with him 400 men. And he divided the children unto Leah and unto Rachel and unto the two handmaids. And he put the handmaids and their children foremost, and Leah and her children after, and Rachel and Joseph hindermost. Notice that he leaves Rachel and Joseph at the very back. That's his two most beloved. So even though God's had a moment with him, and he's changed his name, and he's knocked his hip out of joint and caused him to learn to lean and, memorialize leaning on that staff, he still doesn't just move forward with this boldness, does he? He still goes forward cautiously. And so it says, and he passed over before them and bowed himself to the ground 7 times until he came near to his brother. And Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. Well, that wasn't what Esau was Jacob was expecting, was it? This whole time he's been so worried about his brother going to kill him, and his brother just runs and hugs him and kisses him and weeps with him. And so, wow, it's amazing what 21 or plus years can do when there's an issue, huh? But I think it's also amazing what happens when you pray and you have a meeting with the Lord. And so he lifts up his eyes and saw the women and the children and said, and that would be Esau, who are those with thee? And he said, the children which God hath graciously given thy servant. Then the handmaidens came near, they and their children, and they bowed themselves. And Leah also, her children, came near and bowed themselves. And after came Joseph near and Rachel, and they bowed themselves. And he said, what meanest thou by all this drove which I met? And he said, these are to find grace in the sight of my Lord. You know, we still see Jacob kind of making mistakes and things like that. I mean, you don't earn grace, right? But that's certainly what he was trying to do. And he says, I was sending all these people forward just to find grace in your eyes, you know. And so he was certainly cautiously approaching his brother.
He didn't change his name then either.
Well, at this point right here, he's still being referred to as Jacob, you know.
Right.
And it gets to the point when you keep studying his life that God refers to him as Israel and Jacob. And it's almost like when he's talking about his future and his blessings, he calls him Israel. And when he talks about him as a man, and then when he's making mistakes, he calls him Jacob. I mean, if you'll kind of study, it's almost that way. It seems to be that way. And it's even that way when he refers to him in other books of the Bible too sometimes. Like what is it the time of? It's the time of Jacob's trouble when he's talking about tribulation. And, you know, anyway, don't want to get too ahead of myself there. But, so he says, and Esau says, I have enough, my brother. Keep thou that thou hast unto thyself. In other words, you know, what are you going to send all this stuff ahead? I'm just trying to find grace in your eyes. He's like, well, I don't want it. I got plenty of my own stuff. Just keep it. But Jacob says, no, I pray thee, if thou I found grace in your sight, then receive my present at my hand, for therefore I have seen thy face, as though I had seen the face of God, and thou wast pleased with me. Take, I pray thee, my blessing that is brought to thee, because God hath dealt graciously with me, and because I have enough. And he urged him, and he took it. So, you know, he keeps on, and finally Esau takes. You know something else I noticed right here? Jacob gives God some credit for the blessings in his life, and we still never see Esau one time mention anything about God blessing him. He says, I got plenty, I don't need your stuff. But he doesn't say, hey, God's blessed me too. You just never see Esau mention God. Esau seems to be a type or a picture of carnality, or fleshliness, of dependency on yourself. You know, he was the hairy hunter that went out, you know, in the field and provided for himself, and it seems as if he's kind of stuck in that pattern, even though he does soften up and show grace to his brother. But it's been 20-something years, and he's done pretty good for himself. So he seems to be, gracious to him. But anyway, he urges him to take the gifts. He takes them, and he says, "Let us take our journey and let us go, and I will go before thee." He says, "Come on, let's go, brother. Let's go together." And he says unto him, "My Lord knoweth that the children are tender, or, Lord, I got little kids. And the flocks and the herds with young are with me. So my flocks, my herds, they got babies too. And if men should overdrive them one day, the flock will die." He says, just for those reasons, it's just not good. He says, "Let my Lord, I pray thee, pass over before his servant, and I'll lead on softly according as the cattle that goeth before me, and the children be able to endure until I come unto my Lord, unto Seir," which what he's saying there is, you go on ahead of me. I got to go slow. I got kids. I got little flocks. Don't want to overdrive them, but we'll go slow and we'll see you there. Well, we're going to see that Jacob still struggles a little bit with deception, because he doesn't end up going toward his brother's going, even though he tells him he's going to. And Esau says, "Okay, let me now leave with thee some of the folk that are with me." And he says, "What needeth it? Let me find grace in the sight of my Lord." In other words, Esau says, "Let me leave some of my guys. I have 400 guys with me. They'll stay back with you and they'll help you out." And Jacob says, "We don't need it. We're good. You go ahead." And so Esau returned the day on his way to Seir, and Jacob journeyed to Succoth and built him a house and made booths for his cattle. Therefore, the name of the place is called Succoth. So he didn't go to Seir. He went to Succoth. He went to a different place. But he just lied to his brother again. One thing for sure, Jacob ain't going to have a great testimony with his brother, is he? I mean, he did give God glory and credit for the things that he had. But at the same time, he's still deceiving his brother. Birthright blessing, and now he's supposed to just follow behind him slow, and he just told him a big fat one so that he could get out of there and he could go to his own place. So Jacob is definitely also a picture of a believer, but a sinner that needs to be saved by grace. And so Jacob journeys to Succoth and builds a house and makes booths for cattle and calls it Succoth. And Jacob came to Shalem, a city of Shechem, which is in the land of Canaan, when he came from Paddan Aram and pitched his tent before the city. And he bought a parcel of a field where he had spread his tent in the hand of the children of Hamor and Shechem's father for 100 pieces of money. And he erected there an altar and called it El Elohe Israel. And so, chapter 34, while they're in this place where he said he wasn't going to go, which is kind of like the same thing Abraham's father did. Remember, they delayed. We said his father's name was Delay, and they stopped on their journey, and that's where his father died. It's a similar situation. While they're delaying where they're supposed to have been going in the first place, we have this situation where the daughter of Leah, which is one of Jacob's daughters, gets into a mess. And it's very interesting, and y'all can read it sometime, but for the sake of this class, let's move forward and look at chapter 35. So it says, and God says unto Jacob now, arise and go up to Bethel. So it's time for him to get up and go back to Bethel. And there's a great message in that. I've heard sermons on going back to Bethel. But do you remember the first time why it was called Bethel? Anybody remember what Bethel even means? Do you remember the place wasn't Bethel, was it? It was called Luz.
We had an altar, right?
That's right. And that's the place where he laid on the pillow of the rock and he falls asleep and he sees the ladder going to heaven and the angels ascending and descending on the ladder. And then he wakes up and he says, surely this is the house of God. And he changes the name of the place from Luz to Bethel, which Bethel would be house of God. So now God says to Jacob, arise and go to Bethel and dwell there and make there an altar unto God that appeared unto thee when thou fleddest from the face of Esau thy brother. So this is back in the original when his mom says, you need to go find a wife for my brother Laban. And on his journey, he stops in Bethel and takes a nap, or with Luz, and meets God. And so we see God doing a work in his heart there. But now God's claimed him, more so with the wrestling match that they had. So now he's going back to the house of God, or Bethel. So he tells him to go back there. In verse 2, then Jacob said unto his household and to all that were with him, put away the strange gods that are among you, and be clean, and change your garments. And let us arise and go up to Bethel, the house of God. And I will make there an altar unto God, who answered me in the day of my distress, and was with me in the way which I went. Do you notice anything that he tells his people to do before they go back to Bethel? What's he telling them to do? Verse 2. Put away your strange gods that are among you, and be clean, and change your garments.
So was it Rachel that stole? Who was it that stole her father's?
It was Rachel, and she was sitting on it, and she tells him that she can't get up because it's the time of her, menstrual cycle.
But I wonder if he knew the whole time that they had him.
I think that not. I'd have to go back and read that again, but it seems as if Jacob doesn't know that.
Because that's never, after that story, that's never revisited.
That's right. But regardless of that, he figures it out at some point. But here, though, he tells them before they go back to the house of God to put away their strange gods and be clean and change your garments. And so that really, though, is a lesson for us, too. When we know that we're going to the house of God, and that doesn't just have to be here, but when we know we're going into the presence of God, we need to forsake our sin. We need to clean ourselves up. This is like when we go to communion. We need to examine ourselves, that we're right with God and we're right with people before we go, and we remember the body that was broken and the blood that was spilled. Because, otherwise, the connection's broken. It really doesn't mean anything. But if we are right with God and we're right with people when we go in God's presence, then the communication line's open. He can touch our heart, and then he can use us in ministry. And the same thing here. Jacob, we're seeing him grow in his faith. He's still that old sinner, but he also recognizes where he's going. He's going, man, we're going back to this place where I met God, where I made a memorial. This is that place that I named God's house. And when we go back, we're putting away all this crap.
Because they just killed the whole town there.
Yeah, they did. They just had a mess with her daughter.
Right,
And
so he's asking God to save him again, basically, is what, the way I read it. I don't know, man, I'll be the way God.
Well,
God's gonna bail him out again.
yes, bail him out. Yeah, not save his soul so much, but yes. Yeah, he's turning back to God after they've had a mess. And that's, what we all should do. And so it says, and let us arise and go up to Bethel And I will make there an altar unto God, who answered me in the day of my distress, and was with me in the way which I went. And they gave unto Jacob all the strange gods which were in their hand, and their earrings which were in their ears, and Jacob hid them under the oak which was by Shechem. And they journeyed, and the terror of God was upon the cities that were round about them, and they did not pursue after the sons of Jacob. So Jacob came to Luz, which is in the land of Canaan, that is Bethel, he and all the people that were with him. And he built there an altar and called the place El Bethel, because there God appeared unto him when he fled from the face of his brother. So get that, he's now changed the name again. It's not Bethel anymore, but he calls it El Bethel. So what's El? Remember what Beth is? Bethel is house of God. So El Bethel is God of the house of God. So he renames it. And so what's important there is to realize that what's important about the house of God is that God's in it. You know, the house of God is important, but it's way more important that God's in the house, right? So we become that. We become the house of God, but that don't mean that we're more important than the God of the house, right? So he's putting emphasis on the God of the house right here. And he calls the name of the place El Bethel, because there God appeared unto him. And then it says, but Deborah, Rebekah's nurse, died, and she was buried beneath Bethel under an oak. And the name of that was called Alan Bakuth. And God appeared unto Jacob again when he came out of Paddan-aram, and blessed him. And God said unto him, thy name is Jacob, thy name shall not be called any more Jacob, but Israel. So he's confirming this name change again. But Israel shall be thy name, and he called his name Israel. And God said unto him, I am God Almighty, be fruitful and multiply. A nation and a company of nations shall be of thee, and kings shall come out of thy loins. And the land which I gave Abraham and Isaac, to thee will I give it, and to thy seed after thee will I give the land. And God went up from him in the place where he talked with him. And Jacob set up a pillar in the place where he talked with him, even a pillar of stone, and he poured a drink offering thereon, and poured oil thereon. And Jacob called the name of the place where God spake with him Bethel. And they journeyed from Bethel, and there was but a little way to come to Ephrath. And Rachel travailed, and she had hard labor. So we'll try to finish this real quick before we go. And it came to pass when she was in hard labor that the midwife said unto her, fear not, thou shalt have this son also. And it came to pass as her soul was in departing, for she died, that she called his name Benoni, but his father called him Benjamin. And Rachel died and was buried in the way to Ephrath, which is Bethlehem. And Jacob set a pillar upon her grave, that is the pillar of Rachel's grave unto this day. And Israel journeyed and spread, and say he's now Israel. And Israel journeyed and spread his tent beyond the tower of Edar. And it came to pass, when Israel dwelt in the land, that Reuben went and lay with Bilhah, his father's concubine. So that's a whole other story. And I'm not going to get into that. There's some stuff that happens here that y'all can study on your own. But for the purpose of this class, what I want you to notice here is he finally has one more son, which gives how many?
12.
How many tribes are there of the nation Israel? What does he start calling him now that he's had his 12th son? Israel. So what's been established? The nation. So this step, the purpose of this step is to see how the Hebrew fathers, God used them to make this nation Israel. That's still what? Controversially on your TV all the time, right? In your news. Why in the world is Israel such a known nation and such a controversial nation? Because it's the nation God set aside to bless the entire world. It's the nation God used to crush the serpent. And the serpent don't like that. So now we've established